Beautiful venture that started years ago. Jignu, thank you. You're also here. And so basically, we are spelling books, talking literature, talking about ideas, life, films, so many beautiful things that we see around. And today, people are reading all these beautiful dimensions into their lives as well. So it's nothing beyond life; it's about life that we are discussing, all these dimensions. And I'm here to talk about Don't Sweat This Monster. I am going to call my esteemed panelists as already been described. First of all, of course, Karan Razdan. We know him through Rajni. First of all, a round of applause for Karan, who's been a Bollywood actor, filmmaker, and somebody who really delves into creative pursuits largely. Welcome, Karan Razdan. We have Rashmi Joshi here. Rashmi Joshi, thank you so much for being here. Somebody who again delves into literature as beautifully as into other areas of life, and we would, of course, talk about many of these aspects which she talks about, she lives, she breathes, and she pens down also. We have Mr. Gaurav Patana. I was just talking to him, somebody who was telling me that he only addresses very, very large gathering, which is of 5,000. Well, let's have 50 people and have a great interaction here. Mr. Vijay Patana, welcome and thank you so much for being here. We have also Nupur Thingra, who just met. Nupur, thank you so much for being here. And welcome all of you. We are going to have a great session. We are trying to make it very, very crunchy on Sunday afternoon. We are going to make it a lot more like popcorn, a lot of interaction, talks, interjections, interruptions, but conversations first of all. So we are, as you know, the subject is very interesting. Who really conceived, I don't know, because we were just talking. And it's a great idea. Vinita Bakshi, good idea. A great book, but you know, we are talking about it at a time, and how appropriate Vinita is to talk about this subject at a time when it's really needed to. We see all these spiritual gurus around us, lots of them, but we are the real gurus. So the panelists actually, some of them are real gurus all around in this panel. To talk about this subject, Karan, would you really like to talk about the theme itself? Of course, it's been a popular book, and we are very grateful to Richard for penning down many years ago. And after that, we've been seeing the series and sequels. How important do you think, and how relevant do you think sweating the small stuff, which should be avoidable to you?
I haven't read the book, but I've been told in brief about it by Gaurav. The way I understand it, we should not sweat about anything, except of course coming late, because when I cannot get to a place in time, I sweat. So I think I am sweating about the small things, but I really would not want anyone to sweat about anything. And I think my book, The Secret Law of Blessing, says it all, in which I have given my take about life, about happiness, about hope, about fighting depression, etc.
Take it up in great detail when we go further. But Mr. Bhattara, somebody who's been, I think, training in spiritual subjects, I would say, and training large number of people, and I think it really impacts, because these are life lessons that you're actually imparting. Comes from your experience, or I mean, have you lived through it, or you've read a lot about it, and your spiritual quest continues? Is it Bhattara, sir?
Well, the most important thing really, and I was talking to Vinita when she asked me to become a panelist, and I was telling her, Vinita, what perspective do you think I could possibly offer here? She's well-qualified psychologist, doctor, psychiatrist, Karan, of course. And she said, well, you have a spiritual perspective. And I said, well, if that's something that's interesting, I could start off with that. The only thing before we start is I'd like to, so a lot of people mostly confuse spirituality with religion. These are completely two different things. Spiritual is to do with spirit of your life. That means the essence of it. Whatever your life is getting strengthened by, it does not have to do anything with religion. It could possibly be watching theatre, it could possibly be going for a walk every day, it could possibly be any amount of thing which strengthens your spirit. So that is the first thing when I meet, and I had the good fortune of interacting with hundreds, possibly thousands of people every month, that spiritual has to do with your life. It does not have to do with any religion or anything that's outside. So hopefully I may be able to provide some perspective that you may find useful in your day-to-day thought process, and hopefully getting some value out of it. Thank you.
So much. We will talk about what exactly spirituality is in the contemporary aspect, but more on that later. Rashmi, you've also written a book, but more than that, I mean, how have you really looked at life, and what do you think that when we say don't really sweat the small stuff, talking is easy and it's been explained also, but what's your take on this?
It is always better to practice, and you can practice only if you train your mind. And you can train your mind only if you gently take a step back and don't let a negative emotion, an incident, a situation bother you immediately. Take a step back, think, get it through the processor of your mind, and then if you think it's worth it, let it go inside you. Otherwise, always have a suraksha kavach. Like don't let everything and anything enter you so deeply that you start getting worried about it. So any negative emotion, I think you need to save yourself from the troubles of negative emotions, and that you can do only if you make your mind strong, only if you can let your spirit control your mind. And that's easier said than done. It's a tough process, but it needs to be done, yes. We can discuss that in detail.
We'll talk about this as we go ahead in this journey of talking about life. Nupur, as a child psychologist, and in fact, many of the things that we see, we try and analyze why this person is like that, and we do go back to adolescence, we do go back to the childhood, experiences. How have you really seen it, and how do you think in the current times that we are in, is it on the rise? Do you think the problems and challenges we are facing, also because of so much of urbanization and nuclear families coming into that? I mean, how would you really look at it? What is your perspective?
I'd actually want to connect the bit about not sweating the small stuff to this business about how we're growing up these days. And my perspective is that we end up focusing on the small stuff as a way to not really focus on the really important big stuff. And that we kind of end up getting trained that way from early on in terms of school, where we're actually being trained to focus on the small stuff. The grades, the competitiveness with the person sitting next to you, who's being appreciated more and who's getting more attention for what kind of individual capacity. And these are the things that as we grow into adolescence and adulthood becomes all the stuff that Richard wrote about in the book, which is about becoming anxious about how we are viewed, becoming anxious about what we're going to deliver, and how people see us, rather than really being able to focus on who we are and being comfortable in our own skin.
Question also, just as a lay citizen, I mean, is that sometimes you see people looking very normal. I mean, they look successful, normal, warm, but there are complexities inside. I mean, how do you actually kind of either identify? I mean, for these people to identify themselves internally, and then how others should kind of relate to them.
Complexities within. I mean, human beings are so creative. We have the widest range possible of being able to hide what is truly complex within. Our cell phones are a great way of doing that. Anything bothering you, forget about that, just pick up your phone, there's 20,000 things on it to distract you from what really matters. Simple things that we could notice in ourselves. One is sleep. How are you sleeping? And how much water do you drink? How much time do you spend just sitting and not really doing very much? Being bored. Are we really allowing ourselves to just be bored for a while so that something else can start to flow in? Or are we always on our list of tasks? Ye karna hai, wo karna hai. Because those never end. It's like somebody who looks after their own home and their own kitchen. You know then that dishes never end, right? There's just always an unending stream of dishes. So, is there anything in life that's between dishes, beyond dishes? And so I'd say how we look after ourselves physically and whether we take time out to do that is usually a good indicator of complexity being, that's right. Yeah, that's usually a very simple rule of thumb.
When we started, of course I was watching your book, I could not read it, but maybe I'll really lay my hands on it and read it. You've, of course, we've known you as a person on the screen, behind the screen. You made some beautiful, films, serials. Rajni, is my personal favorite actually, where you showed a woman really, in those days, and if you look at it today, we talk about women empowerment, but Rajni really that time also stood for, fought for justice and things like that. But this journey of yours, where you looked at creatively, these things and your own filmography and the serial series that you made, what personal experiences have gone into it? How you as a person, as a creative person, but also as a normal citizen, you've gone into it.
You mean how my creative process?
No, also as an individual. Creativity is another angle, but also, we are creative. We do something which is creative, whether you write a book, sing a song, or make a movie. But in that process, how as an individual I do?
Well, it's a roller coaster ride to be creative and to be freelancing all your life. Rajni, after I went back from the National School of Drama, was the first project that I wrote, and I was fortunate enough that it became a big hit. But after that, life has been pretty much like a...
Why? Because if Rajni was such a hit, we remember it so fondly. Why do you think that after that you could not maybe sustain, as they, in the small stuff they say, the career journey with a lot of positives?
Not at all. In fact, I went on to write movies like Dilwale Diljale with Ajay Devgan, and they were massive hits. I went on to make a detective serial named Tehqiqat, for which I get fan mail even today. So, but the point is, there will be in between, certain stages where you are also trying to fight it out with your own self to go ahead, and that time can really bring about a lot of turmoil in your life, trauma in your life, and you can also at points see
But
any person who can write.
Sorry to interrupt. Does that happen more in creative fields where there are uncertainties? You do a great hit, a great cinema, a great serial, but after that there's a lull. So is that a problem that you deal with?
Every time you've given a hit, you once again have to rouse yourself to give yet another one. And in my career, where I have made some very controversial films, some very romantic films, some action-oriented kind of movies, and worked with almost the entire plethora of stars, So there are, I cannot put it in brief words, but what I can say is that you are dealing with a lot of egos, right? So you're dealing with a lot of people who actually believe that they are larger than life, because they are larger than life on the screen. So you have to convince them that what you are thinking is right, because there can be a clash. So every time to go through it is not easy.
But that's the problem of the medium, isn't it? The medium itself would involve these larger than life characters, the big Bollywood actors.
Yes, and even a big director like Shekhar Kapoor. I wrote 3 films for him. We would have fights. So, to convince someone whom I think is pretty, he's a genius, so the genius always borders on what.
Of course, yes.
So does Shekhar. So, to be convincing him of a particular story, of a scene, of a character, of a relationship, of the flow of the script, etc., etc. Or a Subhash guy for that matter, too many directors I have worked with and too many actors. So, to be convincing people Because ultimately, what am I selling? I am selling words. I am selling ideas. I am selling emotions. There is nothing. When I wake up in the morning, I am facing a blank page or a blank iPad or a laptop that I have to fill in. So everybody in the film industry or in my industry begins with something but the writer. The writer begins with a blank page. So that by itself. And the other point I was trying to make is that if I can put 500 people in a cinema hall in an elated mood through my script and my direction, I can also go very low. Because I have to feel the elation. And what is the opposite of elation?
We'll talk about that later. We have the word there. Mr. Bhattara, when we talk about spirituality today, and while deciding not to fret and sweat on the small stuff, we actually tend to do that invariably also. How in today's era, whether it's young or old, could come to terms with realities? I think one of the problems I see is that there is a gap between what we imagine, what we aspire for, what we expect, and what we have. Are we really satisfied with what we have, or this have not or could have kind of scenario happens which creates a problem?
Time to kind of improve. So you put in a lot of stuff there. Just to sort of go further from one of the panelists and one of the previous panelists about thought processes. You see, mind has unlimited potential. If you will read the United Nations Charter, it reads that wars begin in the minds of men, and that is where peace must begin too. So the first thing that most of these problems, I had the good fortune of personally interacting with Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudeva Disha Foundation for many years. I was very fortunate I could get one-to-one interaction with him for many years. People only dream of those things. I was fortunate to have that. Have you seen as a child, you're generally happy all the time until something happens to make you unhappy. And as you grow up, what happens? The roles reverse. You're generally unhappy all the time until something makes you unhappy. So what has really happened? Was that the original you, or is this the original you? So when you're small or when you're a child, so if we can use the term mirror of life, your mirror of life is untarnished. You've not had any trials, you've not had any tribulations, you've not had any experiences, good or bad. So you're looking at things in life in a very, very purified form. As you grow older, what happens? You go through experiences in life, some good, some bad. You start forming perceptions, you start forming preconceived notions. That forms part of your habit, the way you think, the way you are. Because thoughts go a long way in determining how you are as a person. So you see, from as a child, we are generally happy all the time, to a grown-up, we are generally unhappy all the time. This process of tarnishing of your life's mirror is what needs to be undone. But the problem now is what? That a lot of folks don't know how to undo this tarnishing which is happening. Because it's not something that you can undo in one day or a couple of hours or 1 month. It takes time. So, in my opinion, don't sweat the small stuff. Is that from a spiritual perspective, I'm probably going to use the Lotus Sutra as a background or a reference to answer and participate in this discussion that's going on with you. So, the Lotus Sutra actually was one of Shakyamuni Buddha's his last year, 72 to 80 years. He propounded what is known as the Lotus Sutra, which is considered his best teachings. And I would, with the permission and with the time of course, would share insights from there into how we can have a better and more fulfilling life. The most important thing is what? You have unlimited potential within you. The sooner you understand that, the sooner you believe that, the better off you are. Now, when the mirror of life gets tarnished, so what is one basic problem that you face in your life? So the basic problem that you face in your life is if you don't look at yourself every day in the mirror, you don't know how good you are, you don't know how good looking you are, you don't know how brilliant you are. Any person that meets you during the day and says you're this, that's what you start believing. Because you've forgotten how you look, and that is the source of all strength in your life. As you start wiping the mirror, you start looking and you start seeing your original self, and you start wondering, oh, was I really this good looking, or am I really this intelligent, or am I really this positive person? Then one of the first things that will happen is, no matter what anybody else tells you, it stops bothering you, or at least it starts reducing progressively, because you're able to see your own true self, which becomes the source of your benchmark of your life rather than other people's. I'll probably talk more about this.
But I'm sure the audience is really, I'm sure, benefiting from these sutras, so to say, and these are life lessons that I think every day we try to read on, but I think when we hear and listen to experts like you, I think we really take home these messages and works well for us. Rashmi, how would you really agree that, how this messaging, just now, in fact, today's times, coming to us from a variety of sources, how this messaging can be taken and imbibed so as to make our lives better, and because I think it's becoming pertinent and important that we really build ourselves truly to be able to perform better. Of course, performance is another thing that is being talked about, but how do you really look at how we can really take our life ahead in a beautiful manner?
Like you rightly said, high pressure situation, disintegration of value-based living, intolerance, injustice, race to the finish line, the craving for perfection, whether it is the body, it is a house, it is a car, it is whatever. There's so much packed into a single modern human being's life that it is becoming more and more difficult to cope with it. So how do you cope with it is, like I said, I'll just explain it in detail. Take a step back, be like the human digestive system. I always say that. Whatever comes to you, take it in. If it is worth it, let it go through your system. And your system will never keep the food. The system will always keep nutrients. So always do that. Take the essence from the littlest, the smallest things that happen in your life. It can be in your everyday life, and everyday life is like a tiny roller coaster. So ups and downs of emotions and incidents and situations. So be like the digestive system, take in the nutrients and learn to throw out the waste. That's what we don't do, because
in the era of competition and performance, how easy or tough it is.
I very, very agree with my panelists that once you come closer to your purest self, once you rub off that mirror and once you start seeing the real you, it really wouldn't matter. The competitions or what other people say or what success is. There are so many different benchmarks of success. I don't have to be a billionaire, or I don't have to be the best. I don't have to have the best cars. For me, every day is success because I live a happy life. I sleep a peaceful sleep. I get good sleep. So that for me would be benchmark of success. The success is such an overrated word because everybody is just running behind the perceived success. So, you need to take a step back, absorb the nutrients, absorb whatever is important and throw out what is not. So that's why I say that, human body or the way you live, it's so important to learn from the way you live because your mind and your spirit is so closely connected. And you have to take in the nutrients, take in the essence in the terabytes of your memory and throw out the whole incident. You know what I'm trying to say? The whole filtering it and just taking out what is the essence of living. And you've got your secret of success.
Nupur, coming to you now, one important theme that we're really dealing with is also about love and relationships. You're talking about children, adolescents, young people, teenage, or maybe any age group actually, we are seeing these problems that people are facing more and more. Because of social media, I mean, there are more frustrations, immediate outbursts, immediate, expression of emotion. These are the things that we see more and more, and it's getting spread all around. I mean, how do you really look at these very crucial, important aspects of a life? What we call love, what we call relationship, what we call related emotions to these. Important, relevant.
It's actually really easy to get swept away by looking at what social media does to us. I'm going to just avoid that part of your question.
Okay.
Because there was something that Mr. Razdan said that made me, that I would like to also connect back to, which is that people who are very creative also have this other streak in them, and you didn't use the word. But actually I'd say that all of us do. And in the book that's emerged from the work in the consulting room, in psychotherapy with children and young people, love is one aspect, and the other side of the coin is always anger. And that the more we accept that both of those aspects of emotion exist in all our relationships, the easier it's going to be for us internally as well as for the relationship. So it's not social media that's creating the frustration. Actually, relationships create frustrations because...
So that's just an outer platform.
That's right. It's become more visible. But all of us, every human being has these opposites of love and rage towards the same people. In fact, it's the people we love the most who can have the power to annoy us the most. And it's that conflict.
Happy listening to you.
And it's that conflict that is the most troublesome. So just as geniuses and people who are very creative have a streak of madness, all of us in our daily lives...
Actually related to what she was also trying to describe is about this performance-related kind of things, which we are watching, and Mr. Bhattar would also agree. Today we are watching it more and more. I mean, how are you being successful? How are you performing? Things like that. So all these things are very related. Then how do you deal with these relationship problems and perform better and be in that situation and still be good with yourself and with others? These are the kind of, this is the kind of home that we are entering.
Well, actually this morning I was going through Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and all those years ago he's basically saying that we've been conditioned to believe that only people who are highly strung and zipping around all the time equals successful. And then actually it may actually be quite possible to be relaxed and calm, maybe a bit dull, and still be successful.
Yeah, we get it right. Karan, would you like to talk about one word that you were trying to hide, but let's talk about it because now people are talking about it. The great word is depression. So people are sometimes, when they are feeling this expression of elation, happiness, delight. On the other hand, they are also feeling stressed and depressed. And when they are depressed, they actually go back to a shell. I mean, and then they kind of trying to lose contact with the outer world. They are more with themselves, and then they lose, many strings which maybe are needed. And but in your field, in creative field, you can be with yourself. You can lose contact with the outer world, but still be very creative. But depression is something deeper. And talk about it. I mean, how you experience or look at depression. Many people are talking about it. Earlier, it was supposed to be a taboo that even if you're depressed, we don't talk about it. We have to kind of within comma.
Vinita told me when I was in Mumbai over a call that we are now the most depressed country in the world. So that made me, because me and my wife Aarti, we have been posting videos after. Aarti is also a tarot card reader, and she's a healer in past life regression and meditation, etc. So after my book released, I was like flooded with mails and messages, and everybody was, 80% of them were asking me about depression. So we posted some videos where she's interviewed me. first-hand experience of depression, and 3 years back when I lost a friend who committed suicide, and soon after I lost my mother. So yes, I did, plunge deep into depression. And then I looked back at my life and I thought that I was perhaps even as a child, I was depressed.
What was it like?
Well, it can come to a point where death is a better solution than life. Right? But to cut a long story short, I can look at the positive side of it and say, my book came out because of that phase.
Okay.
Right? The Secret
call it
of
the
Blessing.
Secret of
But
Blessing.
because I said I have to put it out there. I owe it to people who are like me. So, how I cured myself? Meditation. Meditation creates that same, what she's talking about the distance, slight distance between the real you and the mind. So you step back, because through depression, what has gone ill? The mind has become ill, right?
True.
It is mental unwellness.
True.
So physically, we just rush to a doctor, but mentally, when we are unwell, we try to hide it.
Yeah.
So strange.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk about it. So, A, meditation, what Rashmi said, and B, the more I spoke about it to Aarti, because you can't speak about it randomly to everybody. The more I spoke about it, and while flying to Delhi the day before, on the flight I told her that I'll speak about it. That by itself healed me.
Okay.
So speaking aloud and admitting to yourself that yes, I am going through this is half the case solved.
But then
Bringing
what
it
was
into the light of awareness. Right? So these are two miraculous, ways. One is speaking about it, the other one is meditation. The third one is a 45-minute meditation which I would like to simply talk about in like 30 seconds. Will you hold the mic, Gaurav? You put your right hand down, you put your left hand up, you join the thumbs, and you begin with at least 10 to 15 minutes of breathing through the mouth. Take it up to 45 minutes. It is spiritual, at the same time it is scientific. Because when we breathe through the nose, 20 minutes the right side and 20 minutes the left side gets the oxygen. By going up to 45 minutes, we have made sure that 20 minutes oxygen in the left part of the brain is not received. And it is the left part of the brain which creates anxiety, fear of the unknown, fear of the tomorrow, etc., which causes stress and causes depression.
True. So these are very real life experiences, Karan. And thank you, and all clap to Karan Ravdan for admitting and sharing this awareness. I think awareness part is very important, and I think that leads me to a very related point, Ms. Batara, as to how many such cases. Do you think it's on the rise that people are actually depressed, stressed, and they're not talking about it? And if they are talking about it, how really do they deal with it, and how spirituality and a sense of spirituality can really help cure some of these problems?
So, I'll tell you a brief about myself before I answer your questions. So, I actually left India when I was 17. I did my education in the US and I went to Europe for further education. And I had the great good fortune of heading a very large international company when I was 29. I had about 1 lakh people under me. I believe I'm still the youngest Indian vice president of that company. And then at the age of 31, I came back to India and got into education. Whatever may be the reasons, and that perhaps we need a lot of time for that. But every year I interact with, last year I interacted with about 40,000 to 50,000 students through interactive sessions. What happens with depression? First, in terms of the spiritual context, there is something called the 5 aggregates. All of you probably know about the 5 elements, right? That's earth, water, fire, air and space. Then there's something called the 5 aggregates, which is form, perception, conception, volition and consciousness. When there is disharmony between these 5 aggregates, it leads to anxiety and depression. I have, through the process of Buddhist chanting, gotten hundreds of youngsters out of depression just using the spiritual principles. So form, which is your physical aspect, and the other 4 are your spiritual aspect. Whenever the body and the mind goes out of harmony, you have some form of illness, in whichever term that you... Illness does not mean disease. Illness means absence of happiness in your life. So if you look at depression, of course, it takes a lot of time to first explain the concepts and then you start getting into depression. Human mind, on an average in a day, has 800,000 thoughts. This is the complexity of the mind. 800,000 thoughts. So now, if you're trying to overcome depression, first of all, I don't believe that India is the most depressed country. I follow that, I address a lot of UN agencies as well. India has the largest young population in the world. It's about 35%, and we are I think at about 800 million. But I do not believe India is the most depressed country. What happens is that because of lack of understanding of what this situation is, a lot of people start feeling the social stigma and they don't like to share. It's no big deal. Like I said, don't sweat the small stuff. It's not big stuff. So it's no big deal really. If you are really depressed, now spiritually, there are 2 things which are very important: anxiety and fear. This is what becomes the source. Whenever you want to take care of something, don't do it at don't do it at superficial levels. Try and come down to the basics. So, anxiety comes when there's imbalance of these elements, and of course, depression comes in different various forms. One of it is due to anxiety. The other could be an element of your brain. Now, brain and mind are 2 different things. They are not the same things. Brain is a physical entity and mind is a spiritual entity. Depression can be of the physical entity. The problem is that you just need to understand you can use the spiritual aspect to control the physical aspect. But for that you need some form of either your own understanding of self or someone who help you in a proper way. So depression is not something which is very difficult to overcome. And through my own life processes and my interaction with so many youngsters, they overcome it very effortlessly.
Yeah. So we'll go to Nupur and ask you, Nupur, you were dealing with a lot of these people, especially young, as we are talking about a young India. And so what Mr. Badala says, taking ahead from there, how do you really tell them not to really sweat on the small stuff? I mean, and to really look at the bigger thing. And how and why would we categorize what is small and what is big?
I'd actually like to continue from what Mr. Razdan said, which is that the most crucial thing is to talk about what you're feeling. And this is easier said than done, because if you think about how children are attended to and treated in our families, when children are very good at picking up. They have a radar that really picks up what is allowed to be talked about and what is not allowed to be talked about, and who's going to be good at listening and who is not. And mostly adults interact with children by giving them instructions. If you just think about your own recent interaction with a young person or a child, you will be pretty horrified to notice, and that includes me with my own children. ये करो, वो करो, दांत ब्रश, कपड़े उठाओ, ये क्या कर दिया, ये नहीं हुआ, come and eat your food, go wash your hands. There isn't really that much room for listening to them. And between tasks and instructions and getting things done, which is the small stuff, the big stuff about how people are feeling, how young people and children are feeling, really gets missed out. So, if there isn't anybody, if you're being trained from a young age कि कोई सुनने वाला तो है नहीं, then how are you going to have the courage to talk about what you are feeling? Because you've been brought up that nobody really cares. And then eventually, either you begin to say, okay, mom and dad, you got it wrong, and I need to be listened to, which, let's face it, is really hard to do even in your 40s. Or you say, no, actually, you must be right, because you are my parents, you know better, you love me, and maybe this is what love is, which is, let me do my stuff, which makes you happy, and what I'm feeling, chalo, never mind. So it's this never mind what I'm feeling, never mind what's coming up, that keeps getting sort of stuck inside of ourselves, which creates a lot of issues. So with young people and children, to just acknowledge what it is that they are bringing up, whether it's in the form of stories, or fears, or anxieties, or dreams, but just to listen to them. Because it's in their interactions on this sort of daily, everyday level that a lot of feelings and emotions are actually being expressed.
But how easy or hard it is, because we are talking about good parenting, bad parenting also, and how parents actually sometimes are trying to put their own dreams and frustrations onto their children. And you know what?
Absolutely. So, मेरा बेटा बड़ा होकर engineer बनेगा from 3 Idiots is unfortunately something we all can potentially suffer from, and we have to hold ourselves from, am I interacting with the real child I have in front of me, or am I interacting with some fantasy of a child that I would have wished to have? So who is the real child in front of me, and what is this child saying to me right now, rather than what I would like them to do instead? So my rule of thumb would be, listen more to the people around you, so that they can feel heard, and that will encourage them to speak more.
So one of the key words I take from here is also patience. Rashmi, how much importance would you give? Because we are all in a hurry, we want to perform. Again, I'll come back to the same thing, to show up, to be seen and this and that. You know, in public life, there are these pressures at times. I mean, coming from media, being on television, one has seen that also. How others are expecting things from you. So this being seen as something, and still to be patient, compassionate, all these nice words. But how tough it is actually to be adopting that.
It's actually very, very tough. I would like to take the conversation forward from when we are children. When you are a child, every child is subject to certain values that each family has specially. Basically, chori mat karo, ye mat karo, those are basic ones. But there are also some inherent family values that may or may not necessarily be good for you. Okay. So what happens as a child is you start taking on vrittis. In the sadhana pad of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, verse 1.3 says, Yogash chitta vritti nirodha. So, when you grow up, when you're an adult, you don't even know how many vrittis actually you've taken in from childhood, and how your thoughts have been based on those vrittis, or more vrittis have been based on those thoughts. So, there's so much that your mind is actually imbibing which may not necessarily be good for you.
True,
You know?
true.
So, when you start learning to get rid of those vrittis, when you start looking at yourself very observant of every single action of yours, when you're, I don't want to call it self-critical, which I always am. I don't want everybody else to do it, but at least observe yourself. That's what I always say. First observe, second experiment, third you will automatically know what's good and what's not good for you. And learning the ropes of what is not good is equally important. So when you start observing, when you start looking inward, you know, बहुत ही ज़्यादा cliched है, लेकिन ये इतना सत्य है, मैं आपको बताती हूँ. When you pointing a finger, 3 are pointing towards you, which is a reality. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it that those 3 fingers are aiming towards you, and 3 times more you should actually think of what you can do to change your world.
Okay.
So, things like patience and compassion, these are all just byproducts of self-observation and being self-critical, or, just experimenting and doing what it takes to get your mind to a level where you can actually say that my verse 1.3, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, has been achieved.
We really like this. Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Okay, so three very, very good and key words. Karan, one question that of course I have for you because of this understanding, trying to look at cinema personally also for a long time. So when you make a creative piece for cinema, serial, or you act yourself, what is happening also is that people who are watching it, the audience, how they are taking it. One is my creative freedom to make something, and one is to what kind of impact it would have on people. So that kind of juxtaposition, how would you really talk about it? As to sometimes people say, oh, but we are influenced by this thing on social media, on cinema, on serial, whatever we see. We see a lot of ladies, for example, watching serials at home, and then they take a lot of inspiration and influence from there. And then many of these manifestations, in fact, we know that some of the incidents which happen, they say, oh, the inspiration came from this particular movie or this serial. How do you really look at this conflict or a problem there?
The audience is aspirational. So I have always been aware that I cannot create a hero or a heroine who can be a bad, character to impersonate.
Influence.
Because they do get influenced, they do start impersonating, so you have to be very, very, very conscious about that. I am writing a very delicate film called Hindu, on which my book should be out, The Hindu Boy, before the film releases. So in that I can, easily create someone who perhaps is damaging to society, right? Because we are living in very, very delicate times in terms of.
But what if there is this whole debate about, oh, I can use cuss words and I get away because it's my freedom, but how people...
That is a very shallow debate. Use cuss words, don't use cuss words. That is, according to me, a very, very shallow debate. I can damage my audience much deeper. You see? I can damage them so deeply that, for the next 15 years, that particular boy or that particular girl will aspire to be that person.
I get you, yeah.
So see, cuss word is just, it comes and goes.
Very small part, yeah.
Very, very small part.
So I think it's a very interesting session and theme, so why not take some questions, because I'm sure the audience wants to also kind of interact with these experts. Any question that I guess some of you would like to ask? And throw the house open.